I, Ananda Karthik, have the honor to extend a warm welcome to all those who are present here on behalf of Defense Research and Studies, also known as DRAS. DRAS is a web think tank comprising an elite group of veterans, professionals, scholars, and young researchers to promote the culture of research and associated activities in the country. It's indeed my extreme privilege to present this welcome note and to call to order this honorable panel of experts par excellence. My hearty warm welcome to Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, Vice Admiral MP Muralidharan, Ati Vishesh Seva Medal, and Bar, Nausena Medal, retired, and Major General Rajan Kochar, Vishesh Sena Medal, retired, and our beloved moderator, Commodore G. Prakash, Nausena Medal, retired. I also take this opportunity to extend a warm welcome to Ambassador Deepak Vora, who joins us today all the way from New York. I would also like to welcome all the senior advisors of DRAS who are present here today to attend our panel discussion. We also welcome our distinguished senior fellows, and my fellow research associates of Defense Research and Studies who have graced us with their presence here today. And of course, the strength of our discussion, our dear guest audience, a very special welcome to all the retired and serving flag officers, veterans, serving officers, students, and all others joining us today. Rebuilding the lost relationship between India and China is going to be a big challenge for both the nations. Military diplomacy has taken center stage in India-China negotiations. Today, we shall discuss the nuances and intricacies of the relationship between the two neighbors and see how we can recalibrate the engagement with China. Before we proceed ahead, I would like to request all the participants to keep their audio muted for optimization of bandwidth. You can text your questions to the panelists instead of using your microphone, since it would be easier to collate and accommodate and address them easily. May I now request our moderator, Commodore G. Prakash, Nausena Medal, retired, to kindly take this discussion forward.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you, Ananda, for that introduction. It's an honor to be moderating these discussions on behalf of DRAS, and I thank you all for that opportunity. The current India-China standoff has been under the spotlight ever since May, and there's no indication that it's going to ease out any soon. It's amazing as to how power struggles and politics are playing out even during the times of a global pandemic. As we speak today, look at the sad statistics. More than 10 lakh people dead, with mighty USA accounting for more than 2,20,000. Brazil over 1.5 lakhs, and India over 1 lakh, and all indications of what is in store being grim. Economies have shrunk, millions of people are struggling for survival, and yet what hogs the headlines are power struggles, politics, and a plethora of probably deliberate distractions. Any effort to make sense out of all this is welcome, and I hope that today's discussions will throw some more light on the issue than already exists. As for the India-China standoff, how much are we weighed down by history? How far back should world community reach back in time to figure out as to who is right and who is wrong? How good are regulatory structures, treaties, agreements? Is the world heading back to its individual burrows after a long time of globalization? And where does the common man fit into all this? Is there a way ahead? If yes, how does that way look? These are the larger questions, and to find answers to these, we need to understand, especially young researchers, to understand the innumerable strands that make up every conflict. And to help us in this today, we are fortunate to have an esteemed panel of 3 speakers. Ambassador Vishnu Prakash retired as India's High Commissioner to Canada in 2016 after 35 years as a career diplomat. He has also been India's ambassador to South Korea, the official spokesman of the Ministry of External Affairs, and the Consul General to Shanghai. He has also worked at our missions in Tokyo, New York, Moscow, Islamabad, Vladivostok, and Cairo. Now, this very stellar experience, along with his excellent academic achievements, have made him a respected foreign affairs specialist, speaker, columnist, and advisor with an international footprint. Next, we have Vice Admiral M.P. Muralidharan. He's been the Director General Indian Coast Guard and a member of the Armed Forces Tribunal. He's been the captain of numerous warships, the Fleet Operations Officer of the Western Fleet, the Principal Director of Naval Operations at Naval Headquarters, and our Naval Attaché at Moscow. He has been the chairman of the Offshore Security Coordination Committee, the National Oil Spill and Disaster Contingency Plan, and the National Maritime Research and Rescue Board. Now, with this experience, he is associated with several think tanks, other than being a sought-after speaker and a writer. He's been honored with 3 presidential awards, the Ati Vishishta Seva Medal twice, and the Nausena Medal. And finally, we have Major General Rajan Kochar, who is a former MGAOC Central Command and an arbitrator with the Ministry of Defense. He has commanded key logistics units and has served in J&K and the Northeast. He's a reputed expert on military logistics and supply chain management, prolific writer, defense analyst, and is presently associated with the Economic Times government as a regular contributor of articles on national security issues. He has authored 4 books, is a regular commentator on the national media, and associated with several think tanks. He is a recipient of the Presidential Award, the Vishishta Seva Medal. He holds a PhD in emotional intelligence. That's a huge spread. I welcome all of you, gentlemen. Each speaker would speak in 2 slots of 8 minutes each, 8 minutes and thereafter 4 minutes. And after that, they will take on questions from the audience. I would request the speakers to strictly go by the timeline so that we can address more questions from the audience. So I will start with General Kochar. Sir, very briefly, what are the essentials to the current conflict? And what among these essentials give us openings for conflict resolution in future? Border conflict with China increased in the last 6 years. Why is the issue still unresolved after 6 rounds of Corps Commander level talks since May? Is the 7th round of Corps Commanders meeting scheduled for tomorrow expected to be of any use? Who drives this episode more? Is it the PLA or is it the central leadership under Z? And how does the PLA come across to you? How professional are they? Do they enjoy operational and strategic level autonomy? General Kochar, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Prakash. Very good evening to all my fellow panelists, senior advisors, and the audience. It's a tough task for me with all these questions I have to complete in 8 minutes. And I will make an endeavor to do so. So let me get on to the first part. What are the essentials of the current conflict? A large number of think tanks, defense analysts have been speaking on it. And most of these statements are coming from India and not from China. The essentials start with Ladakh being declared a union territory, which actually irked the Chinese. The border development of the infrastructure coming very close to the border and threatening Aksai Chin in the minds of the Chinese. India's growing relationship with the United States, the defense cooperation we have with the United States today, the helicopters, the aircrafts, the assault rifles, and the howitzers coming and being deployed right now at Ladakh is also case in point. I recently came across a writing of a Chinese scholar, Liu Zongai, who's in their Shanghai Institute of International Studies. He echoes that the Chinese sovereignty and integrity has been threatened by the declaration of Ladakh as a union territory. So these sentiments are being expressed from across the border too. There are two fundamental issues which I feel must be kept in mind. China wants a subservient India. China doesn't want India to grow. China doesn't want India to be strong. And therefore, any improvements or measures which happen in our country is viewed very, very seriously by the leadership in China. And since Xi Jinping has come in 2012 and 13, he is being often referred to as Zitler, a comparison with Hitler. He cannot stand the growth and emergence of India. His Belt Road Initiative was opposed by us, and that is his Chinese dream. He has visualized that he will take over the world one day. He actually mentions China as a middle kingdom, gone are the days. The present situation at Ladakh, we are pretty strong south of Pegongsu. We are holding the Kailash ridgeline. We are even dominating Finger Four. China is strong in the Depsang sector, Patrol Point 11 to 13. He is not allowing our actually patrols to go there. So both the countries are in a position of advantage as well as disadvantage. A resolution has to actually come from the Chinese, because we are prepared to actually sit and talk. So as far as India is concerned, our resolution must stem from the fact that we have to strengthen our own capability. Because unless we strengthen our own capability, we cannot speak to the Chinese from a position of strength. We have to improve our intelligence, our surveillance, our reconnaissance. In the Ladakh region, we have to have these capabilities in place. We need to know when the Chinese are actually going to make their move, and we have to be prepared. We have to have independent battle groups, kind of positioning in Ladakh, and with the forward air controllers in place to actually tell us where the incursions are going to take place. So these are the things which actually require a deep thinking. In the last 6 years, the Chinese have been very belligerent. We had 2008 Ratinala, 2013 Depsang, 2014 Chubar, and 2017 Doklam. And why are we having these things? Because the military and the economic might of the Chinese is increasing every day. Today, China's economy is 5 times the Indian economy. The defense spending of China is 4 times that of India. So he is getting stronger, and once he is getting stronger, he is also becoming a troublesome neighbor for us. And also the Indo-Pacific strategy which we are having with the United States is also troubling him a lot. Why this issue is unresolved still, with 6 rounds of co-commanders and the next meeting tomorrow? Military commanders can only resolve military solutions. This is a politico-military solution. So as far as the co-commanders are concerned, they can discuss terms of disengagement. They can resolve a flashpoint if there is any. Beyond that, these talks are meaningless. In political circles of China, there is a talk that these 23 round of talks which have taken place, it's only to buy time is only to position themselves in a stronger way. Who drives this episode? It's a misnomer that the PLA is driving it. It is the central leadership of China who is driving the episode. And if we analyze the PLA is a conscription army. They are not permanent. So their psych, their training, their competence at the operational level, I will put a question mark. However, as far as technical advancements are concerned, the cyber capability, the ISR capability, the communication, the network-centric warfare, we have to respect them for this capability. You can imagine when the clash took place at Galwan, we were outnumbered, but still we gave a befitting reply to the Chinese. So that is proof of the pudding that it actually shows the capability of the PLA soldiers. I was discussing with the corps commander who has commanded a corps in Arunachal Pradesh, and where plenty of face-offs were there. He told me that the PLA army does not take initiative of its own. Every order comes from the top. The soldiers are not motivated enough. There is a lack of leadership. There is a lack of cohesiveness, a lack of regimentation, and a fear of death or injury. So that is the psyche of the PLA army. As far as autonomy is concerned, they don't enjoy any strategic autonomy. They have also very limited operational autonomy, because the Western theater commander also looks back for orders from the central leadership. As far as we are concerned, our corps commanders have a much higher operational autonomy. They can take their own decisions in their area of operations, in the area of influence, and therefore whatever PLA is doing today, it is the mind of Xi Jinping. So I think if we understand that, we'll be very, very clear what the Chinese are doing. I rest my your comments here, and I hand over to the next speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. You actually did very well. You shaved off actually 30 seconds from your time. So essentially, sir, what you said is that India's assertiveness in infrastructure building and policy making, administrative, and our ties with US are threatening Xi, who is trying to head for the kind of autonomy that absolute power that Mao Zedong once held. You said that their PLA is a conscript army with no much of operational or strategic autonomy, and that from our own side that it is a politico-military issue, and that it is not, there are limitations to what the military alone can sort out. Thank you very much, sir. So now I move to Admiral Muralidharan. Sir, today China is engaged on multiple fronts. So how much capacity excess do you think they will have for operations in the Indian Ocean region? And what will be the actual balance of power after that between the two navies in the Indian Ocean region? And what will be their main strengths here then? And over time, they have realized all this. And so have they reduced their vulnerabilities in the Indian Ocean? And if so, what are their main shortfalls and how do we exploit these? And what operational assistance are they likely to get from other IOR countries in a conflict with India? Admiral, sir.
Uh, Thank you, Prakash. Good evening to you all. I think before I venture into this, let me quote naval historian and writer Paul Kennedy. Here we are talking of two nations, both India and China, who were masters of the sea at one stage and then suddenly developed sea blindness for a variety of reasons. Now, for India itself, as you're aware, while we were in really ancient mariners, once the Mughals came in, we lost track of the sea, allowed the Europeans to come in. Same thing happened to China. They were also great mariners, and including, you'd all heard of Admiral Zheng He and his 7 voyages in these areas of the then known world. Then again, the dynasty in China changed and they developed a sea blindness. Subsequently, in the 20th century, both nations have started redeveloping their maritime capabilities. Now, China, as far as navies are concerned, we can't really do a bean count of, 100 ships versus 100 ships or 200 versus 200. Now, if you take the purely number of ships wise both navies have today, Chinese navies, the numbers would outnumber Indian Navy by 2.5 times. But deployment at sea doesn't happen that way, because it's not like, that you're lined up across and then you fire at each other or something like that. Even history of the naval war battles is replete with navies which are much smaller, but which are quicker, which arrived on the right spot, right time, and able to outwit the enemy. Now, with that happening, bulk of the Chinese Navy's constraints or what they would be focused on in and around South China and part of the Pacific, that area. And as far as the Indian Ocean region where we operate is concerned, where our focus is, where India is there, of course, we have the Pacific, but in this area, into the Indian Ocean region, they would have very limited resources that, in my view, that can be committed. Maybe 2 to 3 battle groups that they can, or actually speaking, some analysts say they will not be able to spare more than 3 to 4 ships at a time. Now, so as far as India is concerned, since we are right here in the heart of Indian Ocean, with our complete naval assets in this area, our assets from shore-based petrol ships, petrol aircraft, etc. In Indian Ocean region, Chinese Navy is certainly not in a position to be a major threat to us. Yes, they could always do damage. Now, China has got a lot of submarines, as you know, nuclear boats. Now, nuclear submarines can be deployed, and I'm sure they will be deployed in various parts of Indian Ocean. But submarine is not something that you can show your presence or threaten, because the moment you expose the position of a submarine, then that it can be neutralized very quickly. There is no question. So that's there it's there and strategically placed. You have to cater for it. But again, you can't deploy in the mid oceans in choke points where you got to deploy them. They will always be monitored, and this can understandably by their anti-submarine warfare is slightly weak. Therefore, they may not be, if we deploy our submarines in our choke points, they would find it difficult at this far to come and stretch and attack us or be a threat to us. But right now, their main worry is that, as you know, roughly by most estimates, at least 75% of China's energy requirements or the petroleum products are flowing through the Indian Ocean region, through which we can actually monitor it much better. We can do that. As far as we are concerned, South China Sea, while we have trade, we operate in that area, but it's not that critical to us, all their equipment, etc. So certainly, we have a main advantage. How to overcome this? China, if they built up bases, they may be able to stockpile some of their requirements and keep those spares, etc. But again, their main area of focus is in and around China, South China Sea, around Taiwan, all those areas. So will they be able to spare forces here is something that we need to look at. And how do we, what are we supposed to do? What could we do to prevent this? Well, we have got to develop good diplomatic and friendly relations with all these neighbors. While many of these nations may be tied up with China extending a lot of money to them to develop their infrastructure, develop their industry. In conflicts time, again, will they come in is doubtful, but we have to ensure that we have enough linkages with all these nations to ensure that they don't. Now, Pakistan may or may not help, but as you know, we were just talking in the prelude to this, when you're talking, as Ambassador Vora mentioned, why have the Pakistanis banned TikTok? It's totally innocuous, but you know, supposedly very close friends, but why they're banning that? So the only way is that we got a very close diplomacy to ensure that Chinese don't get support in conflict, and we got to have a presence in all critical areas. Close monitoring is something we need to do. Our maritime patrol aircraft and ships must patrol in various places. And once China knows that you're in a position to choke or threaten his main lines of communication, they would think twice before venturing into an adventure with us at sea. I would stop here and then.
Thank you very much, sir. Again, wonderful. Exactly in time. It's an effective counter to their behavior. Over to you, sir. Sir, your audio is muted.
Thank you, Commodore Prakash, and you want me to answer all this in 7 minutes and 56 seconds. Thank you very much. Fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It's a pleasure. It's an honor to be with all of you. Let me start off in a slightly unconventional manner. Before I respond to very substantive queries or questions by Commodore Prakash, let me say that I heard with great interest the presentations, remarks by two of my co-panelists. I'm addressing it. I have a couple of, I would like their perspective, if possible, later. But General Kochhar, what you said about the Chinese army, PLA, is music to my ears. My only thought is, are we underestimating our opponent? Are we going are we kind of speaking in an echo chamber and reinforcing each other's viewpoint? Just a thought. Admiral Muralidharan, when you say that mere numeric strength alone does not give an edge to a navy, I'm all with you, sir. But you would recall that I think January last year in 2019, when there was the Naval Chiefs Conference in Delhi, Admiral Lamba had mentioned 2 or 3 things. One is that in world history, in the last 200 years, no navy has grown as fast as the Chinese Navy. 2, their aspirations are humongous. And while yes, we got an aircraft carrier earlier, they got it later, etc. But the way China has gone about militarization of South China Sea or build a railway line right up to Lhasa, their determination and ability to surprise the world is considerable. I just want to park that thought with you. I have taken, now let me respond to some of the queries. One about the hardening of the Chinese position. I have a slightly different take on that. I don't think that there has been a sudden hardening. I think there has been a gradual hardening, which General Kochhar also referred to. And especially since 2013, under Xi Jinping, incursions started turning into standoffs. And there are a variety of reasons for that. One is President Xi's dream of rejuvenation of the great Chinese nation. They have taken note of the amendment of Article 370 and 35A of the Indian Constitution and some of the comments which were made in the parliament. They have similarly taken note of Quad, the increasing proximity between India and the US, rapid improvement of Indian infrastructure along the LAC, and also the dream project of President Xi Jinping, the BRI, And the stand that India has taken is now being echoed in many parts of the world. Even when when Prime Minister had gone to China after, or even during the Wuhan informal summit, I understand a lot of effort was made by the Chinese to bring India around to BRI. And certainly the assessment that India was vulnerable due to the prevailing COVID crisis. So these are some of the factors, in my view, which has led to the situation at present. Lingering border problems, are they a reflection of our foreign policy, diplomacy, and political engagement? Well, it is like reading the tea leaves in a cup. It could be one, it could be all, it could be many more, it could be neither. Even Pandit Nehru had said that Chinese are inscrutable and cannot be trusted. You know, to be frank, at the core lies a widening asymmetry in the comprehensive national power between India and China, and especially as Chinese see that. India's growing stature rankles with China. They want to confine India in the South Asian theater. President Xi also wants to create a Sino-centric regional order, squeeze out the US and confine India to a subordinate position. And it is also the reflective of the Chinese aggressive mindset and the extraterritorial ambition. Now, you are right that what we have done so far has not worked, but we tried. Yet we are shifting gears already. It is evident to us that the working relationship with China is difficult to evolve in the foreseeable future. We have given multiple messages to the Chinese that A, it is not business as usual. Secondly, that there will be a cost to the Chinese perfidy. Economic decoupling has already begun. And we need to form a multi-pronged approach, signaling that one China policy we can also review. If they do not follow one India policy, we are not bound. And a collective pushback by like-minded countries, which I concede is easier said than done. Because today, most of the countries in the world are hedging. They do not want to take sides. They want to feel the lie of the land and see how it evolves eventually. We have already, it has been mentioned that we need to strengthen our defensive and offensive capabilities and forge partnerships, even have issue-based alliances, because I think we need to review our foreign policy outlook. How easy for a democracy like India to deal with China? Well, to deal with China is difficult for any country, period. You remember that USSR, which was the communist regime, they had a border conflict in 1969, if I recall. Same goes for Vietnam. So China is what China does. I think it is 8 minutes. I will stop. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. So essentially, you have said that we are shifting gears now that things of the past don't seem to have worked. But at the end of it, it is comprehensive national power, the asymmetry in that, which really matters, and we need to do something about that. So maybe later, if you have the time, sir, you may like to say whether, is it a good thought for us also, as Deng Xiaoping did long back, to bide our time and build our comprehensive national power and take the advantage of that. Thank you very much, sir. To all the three speakers, since you have done very well in keeping our time, like in the Olympics, we raised the degree of difficulty. So next slot, we have only 4 minutes to answer your questions. And I start with General Kochhar. Sir, now what are the implications of this large deployment? I understand in excess of 50,000, Pompeo says 60,000 troops on either side in a very small area for a prolonged period. What are the implications of the approaching winter for both the sides? Are there any lessons from the prolonged deployment we saw during Parakram, which is of use here? And what are the possible outcomes of the current conflict? Are there possibilities for the LOCization of the LAC? If yes, which side would really push for that? And why? And what are its implications? General Kochhar, sir.
Okay, thank you, Prakash. There's a lot to cover in 4 minutes. So I'll just start with what are the implications of deployment. We already have in Ladakh a corps there, and we have a brigade in the subsector north. So already close to 60,000 troops are already there. We have augmented it by another 40,000. So we have about 1 lakh plus of troops in Ladakh. And as far as logistics is concerned, it's a colossal task. Let me tell you, because the passes close for 6 months in a year. So the window we have for stocking, especially the forward stockings, in terms of ammunition, in terms of supplies, ration, FOL, spares, and equipment, is a great challenge. And coupled with that, this equipment and our men have to function in extremes of temperature at a very high altitude. All these are very, very cost prohibitive. The wear and tear of the equipment is going to be very, very high. We already have spent a lot. It is going to affect our modernization plans, our maritime plans. Everything will get affected now. And the other implications are, when 50,000 troops are in front of each other, they can always be a trigger to actually generate a conflict. So we have to be extremely careful on that. And the third aspect is, when we have this kind of a strength, about 50,000, and it's a parity, near a parity strength, there cannot be an all-out offensive. It has to be restricted to skirmishes, to localized actions. The implications of the approaching winter is there for both the armies, because both have to face the extreme conditions. But China is at a slightly advantage because their terrain is plateau based. It is very easy for them to mobilize and demobilize. As far as we are concerned, we have a number of ridge lines to cross. So the difficulty level is more. Parakram, you can't compare these two, because in Parakram, we had the initiative. It was a weaker adversary, and we had the qualitative and the quantitative military edge. There was no political aim spelled out in Parakram. There were no terms of engagement actually given in Parakram. We just had to sit and wait and bide our time. So I think, they are like, chalk and cheese. What is the possibility of or the outcome of the conflict? See, right now we are holding firm and they are holding firm. We have already done our advanced winter stocking. More than 2 lakh tons of spares and rations, everything have been placed. All ammunition has been dumped. We are prepared. Now, as far as the Chinese are concerned, we need to exert international pressure on them from other countries too. And the LOC becoming a LAC is not exactly a possibility here, because we don't have that kind of terrain we have in JNK. Here we have to guard the likely avenues of approaches. We have to have independent battle groups in place with very good surveillance system. So this will be the kind of deployment which I visualize. Our future relationship with China will be undergoing a change. It cannot be like old times, as Ambassador Vishnu has also brought out. We have to link our border dispute with all economic issues. We have to keep on trying to see that the shoe also pinches on the other side. And all these measures which we are taking will actually continue to be taken. There would be a requirement to redraft the confidence building measures and start negotiations to actually resolve the border dispute. Because unless we resolve this as a border dispute, there cannot be any way forward. China has to do away with its sons of heavens concept. The world will have to get together on a policy of engagement, contain and engage China. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Coming to Admiral Muralidharan, sir. You are aware that the Indian Navy has been deploying our units in the South China Sea and beyond for very long, on friendly visits and other routine tasks. Now, do you think that this requires any revision under the current circumstances? Now, what are the doctrinal, policy, and force level changes that we must undertake in the maritime realm to increase our leverage in the future for better deterrence? And are there any practical contributions that the Quad can provide in an IN-PLAN conflict in the Indian Ocean region, sir? Admiral Muralidharan.
Yeah, thank you, Kabra Prakash. Firstly, we must say that as far as the Indian Navy is concerned, the Navy had already promulgated a maritime security strategy, broad strategy in 2015. So we are already looking at the doctrine and what we want to do. Essentially, it is modernizing our forces and to be deployment based. Now, one of the things is, as he mentioned, it's not, I'm not venturing into what size of numbers you need, what are the kind of ships that you require, etc. But the Navy is already planned that it should be, it's looking at, carrier battle groups, carrier task forces, and surface action groups which can be deployed. And anti-submarine warfare will gain more importance. As I already mentioned, China has got a large submarine fleet, especially nuclear submarines. Now, one of the things that we need to do is look at the new, or what we call the fourth industry, 4IR technologies that are coming in. It needs to be a big way incorporated in our ships that are coming in. We need to look at autonomous systems coming in on board, ships which are, autonomous ships and systems, unmanned area vessels. Essentially, we need to build up a maritime domain awareness, or our intelligence and systems that we need to put to become into a network centric. And you need ships which are much longer legs and downtime between operational cycles to be minimized, which means if you have systems which do not need that kind of maintenance that you see. To give a simple example, you have seen in automobiles itself today, you get cars which are able to, much longer than what they were able to do in the earlier days. Something like that, we need to look at the ships in the Navy. And then now we are talking of Quad and the other ARA deployments shore. Now, as you know, in 2015, actually, we brought in in fact, Australia started talking in 2013 about Indo-Pacific. The Japanese then Prime Minister brought it in 2015. And our own Prime Minister made it very clear during the Shangri-La dialogue, I think 2018, that we need to look at Indo-Pacific region as a whole. So what we need is, it's there very much in our policy. We are not restricted to Indian this thing. We need to go further beyond. That is very much needed because actually it's a continuous zone. And just as China or the other powers are coming to the Indian Ocean region, we also have our interests beyond, in ASEAN, beyond our Look East policy. Therefore, all this way. And as far as Quad is concerned, we have linked, it started off well in dormant, now it's again active. Now again, as the foreign ministers are speaking, they were talking of technology sharing, etc. Now, one thing we should be very clear, at least in my view, while we have close cooperation with Australia, Japan, but nobody is going to come and, we don't have any ties that they will come and, if you have a conflict with China, their ships are going to come attack, etc. I don't think that kind of thing is going to happen, because each of these four countries in the Quad have got their own ties and links with China economically, trade ties, etc. So they may not, nobody is going to, there is no alliance as such at the moment unless something like that comes up later. Nobody is going to fight others' war. But what they can do is, you can have intelligence sharing. And when you operate in this area with them, interoperability, you can from them gain technology. You can, sharing of defense procurements, etc., can be made much easier if you're operating with these countries. And we need to look at even Quad Plus that we can and they'll have. Of course, as you're aware, and Ambassador Vishnu would be able to explain better, our MEA itself was started a couple of years ago. There is a total division now devoted to Indo-Pacific that has come in. So with all these, I think we need to keep continuing our operations in South China Sea and beyond. We need interacting with all these, and similarly with other like-minded nations. For example, France operates very much in this area. It's not US alone. So all this will help us basically have a better controlled domain awareness, information exchange. I'll just take 30 seconds on what the questions posed by Ambassador Vishnu. Is very correct. I fully agree with you, sir, that China can develop and is modernizing into a major force, the naval chief said. But then one of the advantages or disadvantages of democracy is, even if the Navy wants today, the naval chief says, I want 400 ships, the government does not have the kind of money that can be given. You saw the way China, something like the kind of development they did. Now today, many of those stadiums are like idle for the Olympics, the kind of investment that they made. Like that, if they want to increase now, their plan is by 2035, they will modernize, then they'll have much more forces. But the kind of force levels that they want to, all forces resources, they can develop more ships that they want. So that is one thing we got to be careful of. And while Ambassador Prakash quoted Pandit Nehru, here I would like to quote Indira Gandhi. Actually, this is written by Ambassador Ghare Khan. I think a couple of weeks ago in an article in the Hindu, he wrote about Indira Gandhi saying all the way back that while discussing this, he said, maybe 50 years down the line, we'll be very friendly with Pakistan, resolve our issues. But she said, China is one nation, in her opinion, you can never trust. Whatever happens, and we must always keep investigating, but never trust. Keep your eyes focused on China. This she said all the way back. I would stop here.
Thank you very much, sir.
Prakash, I just would like to answer the question which was posed by Ambassador Vishnu Prakash.
Please, sir.
Which was, music to his ears. So I just, man to man, the Indian soldier is far tougher than the Chinese soldier. The one-child policy of China has actually harmed that nation. It has also made them softer. So on all their strategic plans look for non-kinetic options. And that is why their technology has been their actually focus, because they have a strategy that before we join in the war, we demobilize the enemy. We have such kind of countermeasures, electronic counter measures, and our cyber attacks, and we actually demobilize the equipment itself. So without firing a shot, we actually win the war. So that has been their strategy, sir. And their training of the men, because of conscription also, and the one-child policy, these guys are soft. And whatever skirmishes and whatever observations the corps commanders and the senior officers have had on the front, they actually substantiate these facts. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. So a few questions to Ambassador Prakash. Sir, the Quad, which started as a loose setup after the tsunami experience, has come along picking up steam in fits and starts. And how practical is it for this group to evolve into a credible setup for collective security? How will the result of the forthcoming US elections impact our engagement with the US, specifically with respect to the ongoing conflict with China? What can USA bring to the table in a collective setup, considering the series of failures they've experienced from Vietnam till today in bringing about conflict resolution in the places where they have been engaged? And what are the diplomatic options available to ensure that the Chinese do not get useful support from the other IOR countries to prepare for or to wage war against us? To you, sir.
Thank you. Please give me a 1 minute prompt when you want me to close. Just alert me 1 minute before.
We'll do that.
Thank you. You had raised one very important question which I could not respond to in the previous set of questions about what has been the track record of the Chinese. Well, it was referred to by General Kocher. They actually believe their own propaganda of having mandate from heaven. Now, when you have the mandate from heaven, you are not bound by earthly norms. The earthly norms are there only to serve your purpose. So long as an agreement, convention, understanding serves their purpose, they will use it. Otherwise, they'll have no qualms about discarding it. They have done that in this time when in one stroke, 30 years of CBM's understandings have been thrown out the window. Also, what they did in South China Sea is absolutely reflective of that attitude. When President Xi Jinping had gone to the United States for the first state visit in 2015, in response to a question from Obama, he said, quote unquote, there is no intention to militarize Spratly Island. And Li Keqiang has been saying that, but their saying and doing is absolutely different. Moving on to Quad. Quad has come a long way, no doubt about that. And certainly the comfort level is growing. The process is evolving, but let's call a spade a spade. There are still divergences in the outlook of the 4 Quad members. On the one hand, you have US, which names and goes beyond naming China. And then you have a couple of countries which do not even use the term Quad in referring to the grouping. Now, every country has its own yardstick. We have, to be fair, we are the only country which has a land border with China of 3,600 odd kilometers, and we need to be careful, granted, but the fact remains that what we have been doing so far needs to be reviewed, and I think it's about time to shift gears meaningfully, decisively. When it comes to Quad, we need to broaden the base. And this was also alluded to, not alluded to, it was mentioned in the remarks of one of the ministers. And the country that comes to my mind, as Admiral Muralidharan said, is France. France is one country which has the political heft, ability, desire, and stakes in the Indo-Pacific region and can join Quad easily and further the agenda. I am not very convinced about the ability and the political will of many of the other countries, including South Korea, Vietnam, Indonesia, New Zealand, Israel, etc., to subscribe to the Quad outlook, because none of them want to have their relationship. They are very careful of the Chinese sensitivities, but that is how I look at it. How will the results of the forthcoming US elections impact on our engagement with the US, and especially in connection with the ongoing conflict with China? India-US relationship has literally been transformed. There is a cross-party consensus. I think that the curve will keep on looking upwards. When it comes to China, one good thing that President Trump has done, the mercurial President Trump, is that he has blown the whistle decisively on China. And he has called China out. There is almost 60 to 70% of the Americans have unfavorable rating. Even the Democrats have shifted position. So it will be difficult to paper over the differences. Yes, the tone may change a little, but I think the differences will remain for a while. What will US bring to the table collectively, given their track record? There's one very big difference. We are not looking at waging conflict or inflicting conflict. We are looking at conflict prevention. And that is the name of the game. And there, I guess, it's a question of numbers, the will, and projection of force, which all of you coming from the armed forces would appreciate even more than me. I think the 4 countries in question plus more, if they start working together, which there are indications of, that will be a powerful message to China. Last comment about the diplomatic options available to ensure that China do not get useful support from IOR countries. Well, there we have a challenge. China has the financial muscle. They have opened up their wallets. When it comes to the IOR countries, they are pumping money in the IOR countries, especially in the African countries. They are more comfortable with dictators. They take up projects which may not be viable. They entrap countries in a web of debt. And the IOR countries, after a couple of years, realize that they have nothing much to gain, because even for the projects, they bring in Chinese labor. The markets are flooded with Chinese goods, and they are prescriptive and demanding, and arrogant. So I guess we should not get into checkbook diplomacy, try to outbid them. I think their behavior, dominating position, expectations, and prescriptive nature will lead to a pushback. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. The audience has been very busy sending us questions. So we'll straight away go on to some of those. I will start with Ambassador Prakash, sir. Colonel G.S. Radkar wants to know, how can we use Tibet and Taiwan as 2 factors for better leverage in India-China bilateral equations?
My views, as far as Taiwan is concerned, it's an economic powerhouse. It's a democratic setup. There is no reason why we should not enhance our engagement with Taiwan. I have been advocating even conclusion of a free trade agreement, although I must add that our track record in terms of preferential trade agreements, free trade agreements, is nothing much to write home about. In the Indo-Pacific region, and for that matter across the world, big country, small country, rich country, poor country, there is only the motherland which has difficulties in concluding any sorts of preferential trade or free trade agreement. So that is a challenge, but we need to enhance our economic, cultural, people-to-people relations with Taiwan. About Tibet, I will be guarded. We should take up causes which are viable. We should pick up our fights carefully. I would think that signaling that we may be reviewing one China policy is good enough, and let's see how the cookie crumbles. But we also need to be very careful, because all said and done, we have a power which is irrational, and where there is a power asymmetry, notwithstanding the valor of Indian armed forces and our inherent capabilities, which are second to none. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Sir, a question from AJ Singh to Admiral Muralidharan, sir. He says that the Indian military and diplomatic capabilities seem to be better than that of the Dragon. Then why is India still playing defensive, not offensive? What are our short-term and long-term strategic goals? And not Admiral Muralidharan, sir, to General Kochhar. That's the army, where he said that locally we are better off. General Kocher, sir.
I had actually mentioned that we have to improve our capabilities, because right now it's almost about 68% of our equipment is vintage. And
Is sorry? Is?
vintage equipment. So we are still having guns and our RT guns, our air defense gun, L-70s and all, for the last about 20-25 years. And we have been very slow in our modernization processes. Unfortunately, the bureaucratic kind of functioning we have in our government, at every step, Make in India was announced in 2014, and it's almost 6 years. Things haven't actually taken the shape we wanted them to take the shape. So in case we have to match the Chinese in their military prowess, a very conscious overhaul of our entire systems have to take place. And there has to be a single window clearances. There has to be empowered committee instead of all these channels of the bureaucracy. You need to have an empowered committee who will clear all the proposals. And with the corporatization of the ordnance factories now, this is a step in the right direction, which we are going now. And also these defense corridors which are going to come in, especially Uttar Pradesh and all these areas. These have to be actually given a focus. 101 items on the negative list which has been announced by our defense minister, those have to be pursued for indigenization. Because, you know, I've been a part of this process in the army, and I can tell you from experience that how difficult it is to introduce a new equipment or a new technology into service. So we really have to think a lot on these aspects.
Thank you very much, sir. A question from Parth Satam to Admiral Muralidharan, sir. He says that given China's maritime weakness in the Indian Ocean region, as outlined by you, can it be said that the Chinese are hedging against exactly that through the BRI, OBOR, CPEC, and so that they don't have to depend so much on their ISLs and the slots through the Indian Oceans?
Yeah, in a way, it's partly true that they realize that they have a weakness in the maritime area because the sheer length through which their trade is transfers through, and no nation has the kind of force levels to transport or escort all their vessels transporting the cargo, especially the kind of level that is there. Which is why they are looking at the land routes, they were looking at the pipelines, etc. A lot of people are looking at it. Therefore, it's a fact. But yet, since, as we mentioned, that about 2035, that they are going to increase their force levels of the Navy as they plan to the same. So they will get stronger, but they would not be in a position to counter or major offensive in this area, especially against India or any other nations. And I don't think that's the way they will go about it. But yes, if they are able to do a lot of their trade through the shoreline, through shore-based trade, Belt and Road Initiative, they would be looking more for that. So that's one issue. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for Ambassador Prakash, sir. Two questions. One is that Colonel Piyush wants to know that, why is our response, our diplomatic response is so muted? We don't name China. We don't seem to be very offensive about these things. Despite all the setbacks that we have had, why aren't we assertive? It's the first question. And second is that you may like to respond to the previous question from me about the merits of biding our time and building up our national powers, net national power.
Thank you very much. About your question, on what Deng Xiaoping had advocated, that stood China in very good stead for 30 years. And when I was posted to China in 2006, 2008, even at that time, the public mantra, everybody in China used to chant the mantra of peaceful rise of China, peaceful rise of China. And then came a personality called Xi Jinping, who had a different outlook. He wants to carve out, go down in the annals of Chinese history as a person who reshaped China, who managed to, as I said, bring about a great rejuvenation, and he's a man in a hurry. So I would think that, I would like to believe, it's tinged with hope, that they have perhaps declared their arrival a bit too soon. And to take on the US, I would think is a folly. In my view, the world is unipolar militarily because US is leagues ahead of the other countries, while economically it could be multipolar. And also the other folly, in my view, is to pick up fights with almost all maritime neighbors. I mean, I don't understand the logic. You pick up fights, but here is a country which is at odds with Japan, Australia, Canada, USA, the countries in South China Sea, even coveting the land of tiny Bhutan. So I think they have overplayed their hand, and there could be a good global pushback, but that may not be in a hurry. About the diplomatic of tone, you know, diplomacy is an optimistic profession, and we normally don't like to use strong words. It is said that, and by the way, any country's diplomacy can be as effective as its armed forces, as its economy. But it's much better to speak softly and carry a big stick than to speak loudly and be called out. So I, for one, do believe that in some cases we should change our tone, calibrate our tone. We are doing that, but now that one is not having the yoke of office, one can speak more freely. And you know, if I were still in office, I would have, my tone would have been somewhat different. Let me leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Sir, General Kochhar, so what measures do we need for improving our operational preparedness to sustain a two-front situation if the army has to handle that?
It's a very good question, because a two-front situation is on the minds of everybody, and it's already started. Pakistan is being armed by the Chinese in a big way. In POK, the entire concept, like we heard in the news, that missile bases are coming up there, and Pakistan is gearing up. It has already started, infiltration has already started increasing now, and that is going to be the future strategy, and we have to prepare for a two-front or a 2.5 front, as they say. And now for that, see, the country has to lay down the priorities. You cannot be spending everything on defense, because the other areas of the other aspects of the governance of the country also are important. The health is important, the infrastructure is important. So the government has to think about it, because unless we improve our GDP and all these things which are coming up, we are already in the deficit. And the way the COVID has impacted us, it's a great challenge. You know, it's very, very simple to say. And in all these TV channels, you know, people say, "Ki hum ye kar lenge, hum wo kar lenge." It's not so easy. So where I feel the operational capability has to be improved is, first step already started. There is an announcement of the Air Defense Command, which is going to be under the Indian Air Force. So with the S-400 systems coming to us from Russia, it is going to bolster our air defense capability. The second aspect which I had actually mentioned in my talk was on the improvement of our ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and the reconnaissance systems. Today, we will be able to preempt any move of our adversaries in case we are strong on the ISR front. And the government is, I think, already taking a look onto these things. And there is a talk of a cyber command kind of a setup. It's already started in the Department of Military Affairs. The CDS is looking after that aspect. So these are the areas I feel will have to be focused by the government in times to come.
Can I ask a supplementary to General Kochhar, please, if you don't mind?
Yes, sir. Please, sir.
General Kochhar, just two quick observations from you. One, when do we expect the S-400s from Russia, as far as you know? Two, after the robust response to Pakistani behavior, i.e. Balakot, etc., do you think the Pakistani army will think twice before any misadventure, or because their masters will ask them to do something, they'll go ahead and do it?
So the first is about the S-400. India has requested the Russia, as far as I've actually heard about it, to expedite it, and by 2022 we are likely to get it. So that is a very, very optimistic this thing I'm saying. The second aspect is, as far as the Balakot deterrence and the Pakistanis. So today I feel Pakistan has become a colony of the Chinese, because they can't think for themselves, because their economy is absolutely in doldrums. They have also got into the debt trap of the Chinese. So what is happening as far as the CPEC is concerned? You can see what is happening in Gilgit, Baltistan, what is happening in PUK. So all these things are happening. So I don't think Pakistan is no longer going to decide on its own. It is going to be totally dictated by the Chinese.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Admiral Muralidharan, sir. Earlier we heard Ambassador Vishnu Prakash appreciating the Chinese. He said you can't take them lightly, they build their forces fast.
Not appreciate them, sorry. Said that we should not underestimate them. There's a difference.
Right, sir. I stand corrected. Now, you know exactly that how naval aviation is not an easy art to master. How much do you think the recently created Chinese naval aviation will be operationally effective? And do you see them operating in the Indian Ocean region during an Indo-China conflict?
Well, as you rightly put, naval aviation, especially carrier or shipborne aviation, takes a long time for you to master the art of it. As you know, we have been at it from 1961, Indian Navy, and China is fast learning. But as of now, from the reports that are available, they are still in a nascent stage. So I think first they will try and operate in the South China Sea, in and around there, to get it. But as you know, they have developed their own aircraft carriers. They took the Varyag from the ex-Soviet carrier and they bought it from Russia, bought it actually through dubious means, through a commercial company, and then started developing it. Now they're building their own. They're masters at reverse engineering. So, but for their pilots to master the art and get it takes some time. Once they master it, then the carrier groups are supposed to operate as far away as they can they can venture and they would be operating in the Indian Ocean region. But at what stage they would like to take a chance, and especially because when you talk of an open conflict, when he comes in there, it is, unless the air defense systems are very good, he's very much vulnerable. And as I mentioned earlier, in the Indian Ocean region, as of now, the Indian Navy certainly has got an edge. Not only the Navy, but our own Air Force is capable of launching strikes up to this thing. And now with the Air Force having with the air-to-air refueling capability, our Air Force strike aircraft can go any distance. And with our maritime patrol aircraft that are available, like the PHIs, you would be able to monitor, track the carrier group, and take it on in case of their hostility. So that is not a chance I don't think they will take immediately unless they have built up sufficient air defense. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. A question to Ambassador Prakash, sir. So with all this background, what are the likely gains from the forthcoming BRICS event, where probably our Prime Minister and President Xi are going to take part soon? So what are your comments on that?
We will decide when the next BRICS summit will happen thereafter.
Sorry, sir?
The biggest gain would be a decision about the next BRICS summit.
You answer there, sir?
Yep.
Okay. Sir, Admiral Muralidharan, sir. Navies being very expensive entities, what lessons do we draw from the Chinese in force building?
Actually speaking, I think I mentioned in passing earlier, you know, and I think the other speakers also mentioned, in a democracy, you have a lot of constraints on how you spend your budget and how you focus on it. Navies are expensive to build, take time to build. One thing what we can do is, while we may not be able to divert all forces to build up any of the, as you know, commonly Navy is called the Cinderella service in India, because priorities, because of our land borders and our focus, a lot of attention goes to the army, and by sheer numbers they need it. I'm not saying that we don't need it. So is the Air Force, but naval forces being costly, we have to spend wisely on it. So what we can do is, now with technology coming in, you may be able to reduce the number of platforms that you need. Of course, you need certain number to be present in all places, but with technology coming in, you'll be able to get better systems, more longer range weapons, more potent weapons. This is what we should try and use the new technology that are coming in to build up our forces that way, not merely look on sheer bean count. And you can't compare with Chinese or how the Soviet Navy built up in the old days, when you suddenly had money being diverted for everything else. That can't happen in this. So we have to utilize our resources. Like I said, the perspective plan is there with the Navy, what we need to do, what we need to build. And of course, Navy has been the forefront of indigenization right from beginning, when we started building the Nilgiri class ships in 1960s. And a lot of our, at least our hulls and many forms are indigenized, but still we need to go a long way. So when we get the technology coming in, we should be able to do it better, optimize our resources. That's the only way we can build up numbers.
Thank you, sir. So here's a question to all the three panelists from Parth Saturn. So you may respond in turns. He wants to know, how do the panelists see China's alliance with Iran at Chabahar port? And can the current US-China greater power rivalry be seen as a clash between two modes of world communication, with specific reference to maritime and land communication? General Kochhar, sir.
Okay. See, as you know, Ambassador Vishnu would be able to answer the Iran question, but still I'll just make an attempt. See, basically, the string of the pearls concept which China started, and it had this starting from Djibouti, having a base there, and Chabahar, Gwadar, Habantota, Chittagong. So this entire concept, it has started. And when there were sanctions against Iran by the US, Iran also has to look forward to somebody who can actually bail him out. So all their oils and all their everything was actually lying,
States. And if I'm wearing a scarf, and that's not the bridge, the Bay Bridge behind me, but that's a virtual background on Zoom. It's freezing cold in New York at the moment with the wind chill factor. Let me just tell you that when I came here last year, I come to the US twice or thrice a year. Public enemy number one in the United States was Islamic terrorism. I have been asked at the airport, not once, but many times by immigration, are you a Muslim? And I've said no. They said, right, go right through. Today, public enemy number one is China. Islamic terrorism is down to number two. Mr. Ping Pong's problem is not the fears of the Chinese people, it's their hopes. He had promised to eliminate poverty by 2020. His prime minister talks of 600 million Chinese migrant workers living in poverty. Either the man is a megalomaniac or he's demented, or worse, it's both. So I've listened to what fingers we should move into, how we should finger the Chinese and what the Chinese should do and whatever everybody else should do. Let me just assure you that the march of folly, and I don't know if you can see this book for the researchers. I was present, I was posted in Washington when Barbara Tuchman did this seminal book called The March of Folly, 1984. It's all about how governments have consistently acted against their interests. It began with the Trojan horse. Do you remember that? Beware of Greeks bearing gifts. It began with that, Vietnam, etc. And Mr. Ping Pong is the latest chapter in it. Everything he does is against the national interest of his people. There is a coalition, an informal partnership. Have you seen the latest 3 out of 4 people in the world don't like China? The Europeans, which once were wide-eyed, so were we, about China's progress, are saying this was all rubbish. The evidence of China's aggression, belligerence was hiding in plain sight. We just refused to see it. There was a character 220 years ago called Napoleon. Have you heard of him? He said something like, when China awakes, the world will tremble. Well, today the world is awake and China is trembling. He is not even a paper tiger. He's a tiger full of hot air, sir. And what has he done in the South China Sea? He stood down. All those noises that he had weapons that he would fire from Mars or from Venus or from Jupiter, those aircraft carrier killers. What happened to all that nonsense? He has stood down, sir. He's not willing to take on the rest of the world. He tried us in the Himalayas. He's not willing to take us on anymore. The People's Liberation Army, sir, please mark my words. The People's Liberation Army will liberate the people of China from Mr. Ping Pong within the next 6 months, sir. Their time is over. His national debt is 3 times his GDP. Look at this, sir. His prime minister plays the poverty card and has shut up ever since. Anyone who opposes him is sidelined or silenced. You can't go on like this. The Chinese people had a compact. We'll surrender our liberty, you give us development. The development is not coming, so we want our liberty back. Hong Kong is a prime example. So it's not going away. Tibet is not going away. Xinjiang is not going away. If anything, these issues have come to the limelight. So for me, sitting in the United States, Tibet is far away. Xinjiang is far away. Hong Kong is far away. But the Chinese virus, which according to that racket called the World Health Organization, has infected 780 million people. That conflict, that war has come to my territory, sir. It's being fought in Europe, it's being fought in the United States, it's being fought in Latin America. It's being fought on my territory and I don't like it. Please look at these mega trends. Please look at what people are saying. I have a morning group of very distinguished people. We go for a walk. What they tell me is, don't get mad at China, get even with them, which is very American. And I believe the world will get even. It's just a matter of time. 180 days and counting. The countdown begins now. I rest my case.
Thank you very much, sir. It's been a great pleasure. A lovely evening with fantastic panelists and a lovely audience and great questions. It has been a pleasure hosting this event. Thank you very much. And I now hand over to Meghda Bharadwaj for the vote of thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Commander Prakash. honored to have this opportunity to thank today's speakers, Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, Vice Admiral MP Muralidharan, and Major General Rajan Kochar, who had graciously agreed to share their thoughts and insights about future relationship between India and China. It was a pleasure listening to you, sirs. Special thanks to Ambassador Deepak Vora for joining us and being part of this informative discussion. I also take this opportunity to thank our moderator, Commander G. Prakash, for planning and executing this panel discussion in a meticulous and professional manner. We all loved it, sir. I would also like to thank the senior fellows and researchers of THRAS and other guests of the audience for their participation and involvement in this session. Thank you to Anandada for that refreshing welcome and address, and my special thanks to Commander Jayakrishnan and Nayyar for encouraging and supporting our webinar, team comprising Lakshmi, Anandita, Divya, Purnima, and me for the successful culmination. Last but not the least, I'm thankful to THRAS for providing a platform to discuss and engage on a very relevant and important matter concerning our nation. We look forward to having all of your esteemed presence in our future programs and events. With this, let's call it a day. Thank you and have a good night.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Meghna, on behalf of
Thank you
everyone.
very much.
Thank you very much. Have a great evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.